So welcome everyone to today's session. Please, you could all join us. We are very fortunate to have our inaugural RCMAR visiting scholar with us again today, Dr. Kyriakos Markides, who's going to be talking on the topic of publishing in the field of aging and health, reflections of journal editor. Dr. Markides is currently the Annie and John Nitzinger Distinguished Professor of Aging and Professor in the Department of Preventive Medicine and Population Health at the University of Texas Medical Branch at Galveston. He is a sociologist by training, and he has been continuously funded by the NIA since 1980, which is just a remarkable record. He is the co-author of over 400 publications, most of which are on aging and health issues in the Mexican American population, as well as minority aging issues in general. And several of his publications have focused on conceptual issues in the area of ethnic minorities and aging, including a book that's entitled Aging and Ethnicity that was published in 1987. That really helped redefine the field in a major way. He is currently principal investigator of the Hispanic EPIs study, a long-running longitudinal study of Mexican Americans. And I think many of you heard his talk on that study yesterday. And he is also the principal investigator for the Texas RCMAR. So he is part of the RCMAR network. And he is the editor of the Journal of Aging and Health, which he founded in 1989, and which he'll be reflecting on his long-term experience as a journal editor today. And I also add that he's a recipient of several awards, including a 2006 Mentoring Award and the 2015 Claymire Award, a very prestigious award from the Gerontological Society of America. So Kyriakos, we are thrilled to have you with us today, and I think you are going to be also co-presenting today with Dr. Brian Downer, who's an assistant professor in the Division of Rehabilitation Sciences at University of Texas Medical Branch. So I will turn it over to you and Brian.
Well, we had a great day yesterday, George, and thank you, and Roland, and your colleagues for the invitation. And I look forward to another good day today. Hopefully, it will be a little shorter than yesterday, and really more interactive. So, my experiences, Brian and I, with dealing with authors and papers and so on, over the years. Many of you have experience, and hopefully you'll join in the conversation. And junior people, we like to get your questions and comments, really, and advice. And so Brian has been with me about 5 years, and then I will ask him later to comment. And I want to say a few things about the field, and then I'm going to talk about it. Back in the 60s, the big issue in the field of aging and the social sciences was disengagement theory and activity theory of aging, and successful aging, really, which became more common in our conversations later. And then we moved to the 1980s, and the field is really becoming more established, and the rest of the world is starting to pay more attention to us. And people in medical schools, where I have been all my life, who felt early on that the people in medicine, we take care of older people, we don't need geriatrics. But anyway, we have been established. And then the Gerontological Society of America today, unfortunately, we're not sure about the meeting in Phoenix next in November, but hopefully that will take place, and that will be a sign of the success of the field. And another thing I'm going to show today is the field has been internationalized in a big way, huge way. And the number of manuscripts we get is so much higher coming out of other countries, and especially developing countries, than today. So I'm going to. Sorry, I cannot change this. Rachel is helping me. And this is a Journal of Aging and Health. I started this back in '87, really, when I launched it and talked to people about Sage publication. The impact factor is really decent right now. It's 3.2. I want to say something about impact factor. They've all gone up in the last year. And they've gone up because the people who calculate impact factors figure in the manuscripts that are now available online before they're actually published in print. But anyway, that may go down. But nevertheless, you know, it's something that we're kind of proud of. And people send us back. We get a whole lot of manuscripts, and I will point that out today. So in 1989, the purpose of the impetus for the journal was the rapid aging of Western societies. And we conceptualized it as a social science, epidemiology, kind of a public health journal, and a little bit of medicine, some psychology, but nevertheless, it was like a social science and epidemiology journal. In the first 3 years, which was 89, 91, we went back and looked at what we got. We got 90 submissions per year. We accepted about 30%, which is like a third. And we published 4 issues, type 7 manuscripts. And frankly, those 9 manuscripts, it was a very comfortable number of manuscripts. We were able to really accept decent manuscripts. And immediately the journal was received pretty well in the field. Now, just about all of the majorities came out from the United States, and there was a handful out of Canada, Sweden, and Denmark. And as we know, Scandinavian countries, you know, they're very English speaking and very, very interested in the aging of their populations, which is really high, kind of more so actually than the United States. Now, these are the 4 broad categories we kind of put together in order. You know, most of the manuscripts were health services, medical care, and then followed by people. You know, there's a lot of interest in nursing homes at that time. And let me say that there's less interest in nursing homes right now because there are fewer people in this country who are in nursing homes, and especially the non-Hispanic white population. And so anyway, and there's alternatives to nursing homes that people are publishing now. Now, social support, number 3, and social factors, well, that's kind of a broad category that overlaps with a lot of the other categories. And I want to include in that social engagement, really like physical activity, but also the social aspects of physical activity. And the mental health and well-being has always really been a big variable outcome in the field of aging. And by well-being and mental health, we don't necessarily mean psychiatric issues. It's really more depression and well-being, being psychological distress, how people do in their everyday life. So, and then what we looked at some years ago, in 2013, 3 years again average, look how much higher the submission rate is, where we publish more, of course, and we publish them in, I believe, in 8 issues. And we don't accept 30% anymore. We accept 15%, which is really pretty low. But because we do not review as many manuscripts as we did before, only 30% are sent to reviewers. Those that get reviewed, about 40 or 50% get published. So once you get reviewed and screened, and your chance of getting published is much higher. So anyway, we go from 90% of people, manuscripts from people that we send out to reviewers to from 90% to 30% in these years. Though there's some changes in the broad categories, disability and physical function becomes the number one general topic and measure well-being and health in the population. And we have the Pepper Centers from NIA, of course, which came into being back in the 80s, 90s or so, who promote the independence of all the people with research on disability and physical function, but also the biological side of things. Mental health and well-being remains high, again, depression and other related outcomes. Social factors supports engagement. What is new in a big way, it's been new for a long time, is cognitive function and dementia. Dementia is big. Part of it is because there's a lot more funding for research on Alzheimer's disease in the United States and other countries. And because the population is getting older and people are living to very advanced years in their 80s and beyond and 90s, and where cognitive and dementia is a big problem. So that's something of a change, and there's more of a change in that area now, and I'll talk about later. So emerging areas there, which maybe emerged really a little bit before then, but in a big way in this journal, is a focus on neighborhoods and built environments. We started publishing papers on the field, and I've been around the field to have seen it early on in the 70s. And so when we were looking at individuals and then their characteristics, their aging, their depression, and so on, and how they function. And then we realized people live in communities, they live in neighborhoods, and we began to pay attention to neighborhoods, and then we started getting manuscripts focused on neighborhoods, the composition of the neighborhoods, our population, as I mentioned, population studies. I mentioned yesterday, we were some of the first people to point out that the ethnic composition of the neighborhood was an advantage to Mexican Americans, and maybe not to other groups. But and the other thing that is really taking off now is built environments, not just the composition of the population and the availability of good food and the availability of social resources. And economic resources. There is an emphasis on the built environment, the roads, street connectivity, and parks, and the buildings, and so on. And the people are paying much more attention to. Religion and spirituality increased in the number of submissions, and again, part of the reason NIA started funding research on religion in the early 90s. And some people got funded well, like Neil Krauss, who's a good friend of mine. Over the years, he's published a ton of papers, and many others really focus on religion and spirituality. And what has become really big in recent years, and back in the 13, 15, that we accepted a lot of papers that focus on isolation, social isolation, and all. And at that time was when really European countries were paying a lot of attention to loneliness, and they're spending a lot of money dealing with loneliness of older people in especially the UK and Ireland. And there were a lot of programs. And that's really big right now with COVID-19, okay? And I'll talk about that a little later. LGBT aging is a big emerging area. and it's growing. All of these areas, of course, emerging then and maybe even before, they continue to be big right now. Elder abuse and neglect, and believe it or not, you get elder abuse and neglect in China and countries like that. It's not just in the United States. And then we will talk about all the submissions from other countries. But that's what's happened then. And then this is what's happening now. And the new submissions to 2021 through the August, we expect almost 1,500 manuscripts to be submitted, new ones, 1,275 last year. It's a huge increase from just 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. And what that means, it's a lot of work for me, but at the same time, it's causing problems with finding reviewers, but we're not really reviewing that many of the submissions. And 70% of the they're coming from other countries in order. China, huge. I could easily publish the Chinese Journal of Aging and Health, easily, because we're getting like hundreds of manuscripts from China. Brazil is really strong, and Brazil is spent a lot of money. There were the SABE studies in Latin America years ago in Brazil, and there's a lot of good people in Brazil who speak English. You know, and I'll talk about some other countries where the English is not as dominant. Brazil is big one. India, again, English is a big factor in Indian submissions. India, like 10 years before of this, so 15 years ago, there was hardly anything coming from India. But because of the United Nations studies, the so-called SAGE studies in India, South Africa, Mexico, and so in Ghana also, you see an increase in submissions from countries like India. We're just really about to overtake China in low total population. Again, huge. This is countries are listed in the number of Australia has always been big, Canada, so UK has always been big. Iran was a surprise to me, and it showed up in 13.5. It was a surprise to me because we think of Iran as an enemy country and, you know, the underdeveloped country. Iran is a very educated country in many ways. There are a lot of good universities, and it's coming, and a lot of good, you know, manuscripts in English, really decent English coming. And Turkey is another one that's growing. And the European large countries are contributing. Spain, South Korea is big from Asia, Japan is big, Taiwan, Israel is big, Poland is the biggest really in Europe after Spain. And then Portugal. Portugal is a small country, but it sent us 30 manuscripts. And what's interesting, Portugal sent more manuscripts than Germany and Mexico and and some of those other, you know, Russia and France and so on. Now they're emerging. I must say that there's still smaller countries that not on the list are very active in aging, which is the Scandinavian countries, Denmark, Sweden, especially Finland. And they're not as many numbers, but they're, for the population, they are huge. And there's a lot of interest in aging in those countries. Germany is slow to get started. We're starting to get manuscripts from Germany now. Africa, South Africa, I mentioned the SAGE data sets that United Nations promoted. We're starting to get papers from South Africa and Ghana and other African countries, but those two countries, South Africa especially, there's a group at Harvard that is very productive that works with people in South Africa. They're very successful. Nigeria being very big. Again, Ireland is a very small country, but very very interested in aging. There's a longitudinal study of aging and health in Ireland. Malaysia is another Asian country that is sizable but not huge. And the same with Thailand. They all have these large studies, and New Zealand has been really good. Now,
Kyriakos, you have a couple questions in the chat. Would you want to answer those now, or do you want to hold until you are done? You and Brian are done.
I haven't seen the chat. I don't know why I'm not seeing it.
Okay. Well, I can read the
you tell me?
questions. Yeah, so we have a question from Betsy Simon, who asks about the percent of publications by African Americans and how often the subject of publications and percent on the review teams. Do you track any data on African American participation?
I have not done that. I have not done that with African Americans and Hispanics. They're both really strong. And the reason I just focused on the content rather than the causes, really. And you're right. That's something we're going to have to look at because it's going on quite a bit.
Okay.
And I'll mention, so Sage, who's the publisher, I was looking at my email because I saw the question in the chat. They're looking to start collecting information on the authorship, demographic characteristics, submissions from men, women, career stage, race, ethnicity, because that information currently isn't collected. So we don't actually have, as far as I know, specific information on those areas.
Thank you. And you have a question from Joe Gallo about
Hey, Joe,
why only 15% of the manuscripts sent out? What's knocking them out? Is it English, methods used, sample size too small, maybe some other factors?
Yeah. Well, a lot of a very small percentage is sent out. A lot of manuscripts are really not competitive. Okay, they're not really about aging and health, and they tend to be qualitative. They tend to be really small samples, like you said. They tend to be from small countries or even big countries that are trying to do the same thing that's been done over and over again. Now, there is a preoccupation with life satisfaction in a lot of the large countries, China especially. Now, life satisfaction was big in the early 80s, and then we kind of went out of style because we couldn't really do much about it. And then it was replaced by psychological distress and depression and variables like that. And so there are a lot of things that European countries, not European, Asian countries and developing countries are trying to do. They're trying to predict self-rated health, for example, the same way we have done for so long, and we gave that up in many ways. And they kept saying, oh, self-rated health predicts mortality, and therefore we're going to study it in this country. And they're doing the same thing that's been done many, many times. So yeah, I must say that a lot of the foreign submissions are solid. A lot of them are not, and that's part of the dropping. Now, the other part, George, the 15% sent to review, we just can't do it. We're a small journal, we don't have the resources. And then if we do send more, 50%, let's say, and then we're going to have to increase the pages. And we've been increasing the pages, as you might guess, throughout in a big way. And so that's just not going to happen. But we do recommend them to submit to other journals, and many do. And many are open access journals. The state journals are actually not open access, like Research on Aging, for example, the Journal of Applied Gerontology. So they can try there. But it is not unique to us. When we were sending only 30% in 2013-15 to reviewers, the gerontologists were sending 40 to 50% then, and then now their numbers are, I imagine they're really slow. I don't know, maybe you guys have an experience with other journals, what they're doing, but not many are sending a whole lot of manuscripts to reviewers. And it's the quality of it. It's my perception and my biases. And the small samples and qualitative studies, we are more of an epidemiology, social epidemiology journal. So I don't know if that answers you. I mean, it's just happening with a lot of.
Yeah, I think so. I think more and more journal editors are doing desk rejects, and I'm aware of journals where it's even higher than, the
Oh, really?
numbers you cite. Yeah. Gail asked, actually, there are two other questions here, Kokos.
Sure.
Gail Wallace is asking, what percentage of manuscripts solo authored versus multidisciplinary team-based? Do you have any?
A tiny manuscript is solo authored, and those come from sociologists from big departments like my friends at University of Texas in Austin, where it is really important for them to be independent and publish and do the whole thing themselves and methods and everything. But that number has gone down. That's gone down as the field has grown beyond social science, and then we have epidemiology in a big way, and war and medicine. We're the some of the reviewers have, when we send like an ISO with like one reviewer, and they found out it was an error. They were concerned that one reviewer is not enough to really do a good job with the breadth of the field and the challenges. And so, but very few, I would say maybe 10% of the manuscripts only have one author. And Brian, do you have a sense of that? And in other fields, like are you very aware of the business in the Alzheimer's disease, for example? What is it? You don't, you don't see single author.
Yeah, in the medical journals, at least just from my own observation, to me, it's like becoming increasingly rare to see, solo authored publications. Much more multidisciplinary teams. If you look at the authorship affiliations, you see multiple departments, multiple institutions, and yeah, much less, at least in the results, solo author publications.
I'm happy you raised that, Kokos, because I was trained to be a solo author. And recently, someone said, long gone are the days of solo authorship. You really need to collaborate with team members. So I think it's rare, would you say, to see people doing a lot of solo authored research these days in general?
Well, you're right in the sense that that's the evolution of the field, and it has become so interdisciplinary that you both of you commented on that. And then you really need to have. Sometimes you get so many manuscripts, so many reviewers that it's become a problem. Too many. Like I was telling Brian, sometimes we get more authors, and you get more authors than subjects. That's a problem with big studies. But the day of the sole author is ending. If you go beyond sociology and psychology and the traditional academic disciplines, and you go to multidisciplinary work, you have to.
So Kokos, we have one other question in the chat from Betsy. Do you do a warm handoff to other journals for promising articles? Interesting.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Do you do a warm handoff to other journals for promising articles? What's a handoff like, I think, is what she's asking.
How warm it is. How warm it is, I don't know. But we do hand it over to the other journals, Research on Aging and Journal of Applied Gerontology, primarily in the same publication. On occasion, I spend a lot of time, because we do reject a lot of hundreds, thousands that we don't review. I spend time in advising the authors to send it to a specific journal, which I think might be a good idea. And yesterday, for example, I said, hey, why don't you send your journal to the clinical gerontologist? It's kind of a small journal, but it's coming up. And it's clinical, and it became with psychologists, but it's publishing things that are not really clinical, but clinically relevant. I did that yesterday, and it was what you might call a war gesture to recommend another journal. Yeah, I mean, we try. But when I do it very quickly, like the same day. The same day I say, we're not going to review your paper. And people say back and he said, thank you, and I appreciate the quick response. And I don't feel bad. I know of examples of some journals who will sit on a journal for like weeks or months before they say it's not relevant. But that's just not a good thing. That's not a good thing for the field. And when we do send things to review, we make a chance. I mean, we make the decision within 2 months for sure. Most of the time, much earlier than that.
So Betsy thanks you. That means
Thank
a lot.
you. Yeah, very nice question. Yeah. Anybody else?
Yeah, Cocos, this is Roland. Great talk so far. You mentioned earlier about open access journals. Could you just take a moment, because there's mixed information out there about open access journals aren't good. Some spaces talk about you shouldn't be publishing in open access journals. You're trying to get promoted, and then there's a list of key open access journals now. So could you talk a moment about open access journals?
Yeah, actually, what I will do is I'm going to let Brian talk about that because
Okay.
he's affiliated with an open access journal,
Okay.
I believe now, and helps them. But the brief response is that they are accelerating. There's like one every almost week. You know, many of us get invitations to submit, and because a lot of the established journals like ours, we cannot publish or even review that many. They have to go to open access journals. I have to. I've done it with
Right.
2 of my medical students I've been working with. But Brian, do you want to comment on that?
Sure. So yeah, I think the perception around open access
Right.
journals has started to change since so many of the major publications now have an open access version. You know, like there's JAMA open access, you know, Alzheimer's and Dementia has an open access journal. The one that I've been most recently involved with is BMC Geriatrics, and BMC has a whole family of open access journals. And those, in my experience, at least, it's much more likely that your manuscript will be sent out for peer review. Now, it may take a long time to be sent out to peer review because the open access journals, at least for the BMC family of journals, gets just an absolutely incredible number of submissions. And so finding reviewers can sometimes be a challenge for depending on how specific a topic might be, or just if people are even available. So in those instances, you have to kind of balance between, you know, how long do you want to potentially wait for your manuscript to go out to review versus at least getting some level of peer review feedback. And another thing to kind of keep in mind is the open access journals, you know, in general can be expensive in terms of the publication fees, but others can be a little bit more manageable. I think Innovations in Aging, which is the GSA open access journal, I think they're a little bit more reasonable compared to others. But yeah, so just because a journal is open access doesn't mean it's, you know, a poor quality journal or you shouldn't submit. But you do want to maybe look into a little bit and see what maybe the general reputation of the journal is, especially if it's a journal that's not affiliated with a well-established publisher or well-established journal.
I think that's great
Thank you.
comments, and I'll open it up to maybe others who may want to come. You, Roland, I mean, what is your experience?
So yeah, Cocos, thank you. So when I coming up through the ranks, I was advised not to publish in open access journals, but I noticed that they've evolved, like Brian said, they've evolved over the years. And so I just wanted to have this conversation so the early career faculty on here can understand that if they've gotten the information that is not good. There are some good ones. I've published Cocos myself. I published an Innovation Age, and I think 2 months ago. And so, and then another open access, JAMA open access a couple 3 months ago or something like that. So yeah, I am publishing in them, but I thought it was important for us to have this brief conversation. I really appreciate your answer, Brian, around that, because there is some miscommunication. At least I've heard miscommunication around this. And I just thought this would be a space that we can have that type of conversation.
Thank you both very much. And I just realized I'm looking on my clock. It's 22, and we're going to move to tips for publishing. And I have a kind of a random list of things that is not complete, and Brian will join me and maybe others. But what I want to say now is that the published papers in order now are cognitive and dementia by far has taken over as the #1 outcome of interest to our subjects. And I think the field in general really has a lot to do with Alzheimer's disease funding, mental health and well-being continues, disability and physical function continue. What's emerging again, this is like we gave up studies of caregiving in the 80s. We thought we had figured it all out. And now it's a big thing because again, there's so much work on dementia and Alzheimer's disease and so much funding that the caregiving has become a major problem. In our case that we're paying attention, in our cases that are subjects in our study, we've been studying them so long, they're very old now. So we started looking at the caregivers and so that's kind of a re-emerging emphasis. What are some of the new areas now in 2000 and during the pandemic, of course. So we have COVID-19. Thousands of manuscripts have been accepted and published all over the world. COVID-19, they're coming to me now, and I'm to the point where I'm tired of them. And I hate to say that. And a lot of them are maybe papers that got rejected from medical journals or somewhere else, and they are not competitive. They are like talking about the experience of the lockdown, which happened in April of a year ago. And again, that's ancient history right now. There were issues about loneliness, isolation, and this is so the resilience, and all of these things that we studied then, and they happen all over the world. Things changed after that initial lockdown in the US and elsewhere. So COVID-19 is a challenge for the people who are, but they're still coming. They're improving. We're seeing data from the late 2020 and early 2021. A big thing I mentioned earlier is social isolation and morbidity and loneliness, and resilience is part of the field in general, but also it goes with COVID-19. Multimorbidity is a new emerging field. It's been going on for a while, but and it's coming from all over the world now because we are looking at combining diseases like diabetes with high blood pressure and so on. And then biomarkers are big. They've been around a while now, but they're becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. And I want to say that the social science world has been at the forefront of the biomarker development. Frailty is big, especially with medical people. And really recently, in the last 5 years, maybe I'm wrong, but we seem to be getting more things on pain. You know, that's an important area that we haven't looked at it as much. I'm going to look at the two tips and don'ts, and I'm going to go through these quickly, and then they're random. They're not in any good list. And I was in Singapore when I did this a year and a half ago, right before the pandemic. And I talked to the university, the National University of Singapore. One of the issues was language because they had a lot of foreign students and so on. But I'll just leave that there. And What's important now, you have to get through the abstract right now. I mean, with the abstract, you have to get through to the editor. And most of the abstracts I reject, the manuscripts I reject. So one thing that is happening more to me, and maybe I'm not going to encourage it, but I think it's a good idea from junior people to contact the editor, okay, and ask, send an abstract or even a manuscript. And if the editor says yes, of course, the editor feels like kind of an obligation to look at your manuscript when you submit it and not reject it right away. We talked about the open access journals, and they're expensive, of course, and they're proliferating. They're all over the place. There is a journal style is a big issue, okay? We still get medical manuscripts coming to us with the medical citation, and that's a real problem. And we are not a medical journal. We are a APA style journal. We talked about earlier in response to a question about the small samples, the qualitative studies, and the number of authors. We're getting a lot of authors. Our publishers are telling us the manuscript with a lot of authors, they get more citations, and well, some of them do, but you get a qualitative study of 10, 15 people and you have 20 authors. It's not unusual, it's kind of turned off. The other thing that turned me off personally, and I think some of my reviewers, is to avoid or minimize the use of acronyms. We are familiar with things like SES, socioeconomic status, but every other concept now is becoming, with a lot of people, regardless of what it is, an abbreviation, and it's hard to read, and you have to go back to the beginning, to the abstract, to know what's going on later on. Don't do that, or don't do it in a big way. The other thing I recommend to new people, and not many people seem to be doing it, they just go to the website, okay, and then they send a manuscript. Go to the journal and look at what is being published, because what was in the website many years ago is very general in this case and many other journals, and we're more focused now, and see what's being published now, and then send your manuscript. Papers are come. Some of them I catch, some of them the authors, they may cause a statement based on cross-sectional studies. We're all aware of that. There is less and less of that over the years because we have more longitudinal studies. And as a kind of a social epidemiology journal, we specialize in longitudinal studies. And the other problem is we're getting a lot of purely descriptive studies. They have regional significance to a city in Maine, or a city in Kentucky, or a state in the United States, or an area in India, or a whole country. Do they have significance to the larger world? So you need to have kind of a conceptual contribution if you want to publish a regional study. And a lot of people don't do that. And they just think that we haven't done this in Iran, let's do it in Iran. We haven't done this in Malaysia, let's do it in Malaysia. Well, you know, it's important to those countries, but it's not important to the scientific world, in the Western world, the world in general, really. And I just put maybe it doesn't belong there, but good things correlate with good things and bad things with bad. And I have a paper on discrimination and faults. And at first I saw, God, why is that related? Okay, is there a cause? That's discrimination because people fall more. And I'm not talking about ethnic discrimination. I'm talking about there's more and more manuscripts coming about being discriminated because you're older. And so anyway, again, look for a conceptual framework in your work. And the other thing that has a difficulty is proposing new measures of something. We've done that in the past. People are hung up on self-ratings of health, and I think objective measures anymore are doing better. And so work with a well-known or famous, not so much famous, but good people to help the junior people. It's going to help with you to get your review papers are funny because the publishers like them because they get cited, but a lot of review papers are not really good, and they're people who don't have any data and they want to publish a review paper. And now there are some review journals, thank God, so they take that. And the other thing that some manuscripts are not really aging related, even though it's an older or middle-aged sample, but pay more attention to the aging aspect of the study or the life course aspect. And then novelty, something that reviewers are saying, this is something really not new. Let's not publish it. So I'm going to just stop there and have Brian say a couple of words and then open it to. Don't say too much, Brian. I think we are almost an hour.
Yeah, I just have kind of 2 or 3 points of advice that I've been given that I have found to be helpful that I wanted to share. So the first one, and this is one that's I think helped me the most, and is the one that I think about the most, at least when I'm writing, is basically throw away your thesaurus. Like, you don't need to include these really complex and long words. Like, to me, the manuscripts that I enjoy reading the most are the ones that are written in a very easy to understand way. So don't use unnecessarily, huge words. It goes along with the unnecessary use of acronyms as well. Make your writing as easy to understand as possible. The second is I would encourage people, to consider writing like a brief report. So the Journals of Aging and Health, we don't have specific manuscript types like other journals. Most of our manuscripts are about 30 pages in length. That doesn't mean you have to use the full 30 pages, but a lot of other journals will have specific manuscript submission types for brief reports. And for me, I found those to be helpful to kind of refine my writing because it forces me to eliminate some of the unnecessary words I might be including, really focus on the main points of what it is I'm trying to say. Then also, the brief reports might allow you to present like a limited number of results. So maybe you don't have enough findings to make up for a full manuscript, but you might be able to submit it as a brief report. Then the last thing I'll mention is about contacting the editor. So that's largely kind of my role at the journal. Is oftentimes I'll have people who are interested in submitting their manuscript. They'll contact me, they'll include the abstract, and they'll ask if the manuscript is a good fit. And it gives me a chance to read through their abstract, decide, yes, this is a good fit, I would encourage you to submit, or no, this isn't maybe as good of a fit, but then making a suggestion of a journal that might be more appropriate for their manuscript. So I'd be interested to hear other people's thoughts and suggestions.
George.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Kokos and Brian. Before we turn to Joe and Chin Lee, are going to respond to what's been presented and offer some of their own observations. There are a couple comments here in the chat window. Betsy comments that social isolation was a problem for many older adults, especially frail, before the pandemic. Should we still focus on this issue without pointing to the pandemic only?
I think so. I think to be honest with you, it's more important than focusing on the pandemic because that's been overstudied. And frankly, a lot of people are not as lonely anymore. They were lonely in the early part. And then what happened, there was a study out of the UK maybe a year ago that showed that after the initial lockdown, that the older people in Britain, in an international study of happiness, they were much happier than they were before the pandemic. At some point, just because people paid attention to them, their family members call more, they do Zoom meetings, and so anyway, it's not all that bad. But loneliness in aging is a big one. It's a big one, and regardless of the pandemic, and it's going to continue. Social isolation and loneliness, and it's becoming an increasing problem to a lot of countries. And so let's stay with it. Yeah.
And Joe's put a couple links into the chat. Joe, do you want to just comment on those? One has to do with the Jane estimator.
Let me introduce you to my friend Jane. When you go to that resource, there's a box, put your abstract in, and it will give you a list of journals that match to that abstract or authors.
That's great.
To that abstract. And the other one is a website where you can go, put in the journal name as a keyword. It will, and then when you click on the journal name, it takes you to the instructions for authors, and also there you can look at the table of contents and look up other, so you get a feel for what's in that journal. Because I think, well, yeah, okay.
Great. Those sound like great resources, Joe.
Great
So
comment.
we have about 5 minutes or so. Joe and Chinley, maybe you could just make a few brief remarks, and then hopefully you can open it up for a general discussion, a few questions. Antonio, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, no, but I wait for.
Okay. All right. So Joe and Chinley, would you like to just go ahead?
Well, go ahead, Chinley. You can go ahead.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for the talk. I really enjoyed it. I certainly can see many of the similar issues across different journals, and through my own experience. So I just have 3 points, or questions. One is, given that sort of the increase of foreign submissions, and I wonder maybe if journals should begin to have online archives for cataloging the different measures used by international communities on some key outcomes. Sometimes it's just a struggle trying to find out what the specific definitions or measures that papers use for different countries, and the general characteristics of the study population at large. Those things, maybe the online can be part of the online submission requirement. So that's number 1. Number 2 is, some journals have statistical reviewers, others don't. So I don't know if the Journal of Aging and Health has in-house statistical reviewers or editors, and how important is that role? And the third is the finding the right reviewers. That tends to be quite burdensome for associate editors or editorial board members. So I'm not sure if you have any ideas or suggestions about how to use technology, maybe in facilitating finding the right match. So those are the 3 things on my mind. Thank you again.
Brian, you want to respond to that first?
Well, I'll start with the reviewers, because that was actually going to be one of the items I was going to talk about. So for me, in my experience, I find it helpful if the author provides the names of 2 or 3 people who could be initially requested as a potential reviewer. Some journals require that. I don't believe JAH, I don't believe we require that. But that's something that could be included in the cover letter if it's not something that's built into the journal submission. And that's, helpful for the associate editors, just in case they're not immediately thinking of a group of people who might be a good reviewer. So I think suggesting reviewers is always a good option. In terms of the statistical review, Kyriakos, I'll have to refer to you. I don't believe we have specific people as editors for the statistical analyses, but I think that factors into the selection of the reviewers. You know, if we know of somebody who's an expert in a particular area, you know, we might specify them to conduct the review.
Well, I must say that we have not spent a whole lot of time thinking about the international submissions, not to us, but to the whole field. You know, the internationalization of aging. You know, and it's really the internationalization of science in general, and with some of the best excitement coming out of China and other countries, and that's something that the field needs to spend more attention to, and not isolate them and let them publish in their own journals. And many countries now have their own journals in aging, for example. And so that's we haven't done that as well, and it should be done. It should be done. Yeah. Any other comments?
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Jin Lee. And Joe, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I'll keep it short. I'm trying to avoid looking at point number 5. Surely, if you're doing implementation research or other things, and a lot of pilot studies that, you know, that scholars or scientists do, will involve qualitative methods and mixed methods. So I'm assuming it doesn't mean don't do them. So, but let me go back to it. So the points I wanted to make was review papers for journals. You get the chance, or hook up with a faculty member, because I'm always getting asked. I don't want to do them all. And I have certain people I put as, you know, potential reviewers. But if you want to do that, give me your name and email, and I will put you in the queue. I think it's really good to do, because you see the kind of stuff that gets submitted, and it should lower your threshold for perfection before you submit something. The second thing is, since Brian mentioned about writing, the elements of style. Buy that book, read that book, and there's so many points in there about writing that I think is, you know, that simple basic thing is really important. And think about the audience you want to go to, and you can use those tools that we've been talking about in the chat to kind of hone in on, you know, who is the audience for the work that you're doing? What's the message? And know that audience and write to them. And perhaps, by the way, cite papers from the journal that you are writing your manuscript for. I don't know how important that is, but I think sometimes that it is.
Well, I think actually citing people publishing in the same journal is a great advantage. First of all, it makes it easier for the viewers to go back to the published journals and get those people who were the authors of the previous journal. So anyway, it's a great idea.
Thanks, Joe. Roland agrees in the chat, says elements of style is awesome. And then Brian comments that number 5 is more of a guideline specific to Journal of Aging and Health. Lots of great qualitative research being published. It can be a great addition to a population-based study. Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, and just quick, I'll just say that does kind of speak to the Joe's point about writing to the particular audience. So like, we don't have a lot of reviewers in our database who have expertise in qualitative methods and qualitative research. And so yeah, it's just kind of finding the journal that fits well with your study.
Okay, we're almost at time, but Antonio's had his hand raised for a while, so I wanted to give him a chance to ask his question. So Antonio, go right ahead.
Oh, hi, Professor Markides. Thank you so much for a very insightful presentation. So my question is, you talk a lot about the papers that you receive. So if I think as an economist, I would think this is the supply, and the supply have changed over time, and you have been more strict to let the, which of these supply I will take. But how do you get a sense of your audience and the change of your audience, the people who are reading your journal? Because usually when I think about a paper, the way that I think about it is your paper number 1000 on the same topic, but you change the city or the country or the data time, or your paper number 1 to 11 in a new, very creative idea. So when you're selling the later, you think more about the audience of your journal. And what I always have hard time is to figure out who is reading your journal. How can you get a sense of, because that's what I wanted. I wanted to get to people who really, my paper number 10 or 20, if I believe that it's a novel idea, will have more impact. And I know the impact factor, it's a proxy for that, but you are like, kind of like, you have that information, and I'm curious about how do you get a sense of your demand, the people who read your journal.
So I guess the easy way to know about what your audience is, you examine the various impact factors of the various journals. I mean, a journal that has an impact factor, that's because people read it.
Yeah, but you don't know who are reading that. You know that there's a lot of people, but you don't, the audience that you wanted to influence or things like that, it's much harder to get a sense of that, right?
But you can always get who is citing what through the various ways of doing that. The Google Scholar would be another one, to take manuscripts and follow them through and see who is citing them.
Yeah.
But that's a really important thing for the students to learn about too. The newer people is to look up who is paying attention to the manuscript. But it's really a great comment. I don't know anybody else has any comments to that.
Well, I think we are just about out of time. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank you, Kyriakos, and also Brian, for sharing your reflections and tips on publishing. It's really been a very, very stimulating session, and I think we've all learned a lot. Roland, did you want to make any final comments?
No more than to say thank you, Brian and Kyriakos, for the outstanding presentation.
Well, thank you all for inviting us. It's been a pleasure to talk to you about our work.
Okay, well, it's been great
very
hosting.
important to all of us, publishing business is what we do.
Yeah.
It's been great, great hosting you. And Journal of Aging and Health has always been a cutting edge journal. And I know, a lot of us read that journal, and really look forward to, continued success with that journal. So I think we'll end it there. And Kyriakos will be meeting with some of the program faculty in about 10 or 15 minutes. So
yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Take a breather.
Less than that.
All right. Yes, less than that. Okay. Thank you so much. Lots of thank yous in the chat as well.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you very much.
All right. Bye-bye.
Let's